Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Nerd News Desk. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of the new comics coming out this week, and there's a lot of stuff to choose from. There's actually probably a little bit of something for everybody. So, if you're looking to probably buy some comics this week, then I think we might have something for you. Let's jump in and start taking a look here. First up, the Jim Cornette Presents Behind the Curtain Wrestling Stories trade paperback. Now, this is a lot of stories from Jim Cornette's podcast, and they just tell you a lot about the history, some of the stuff that's happened behind the scenes of the wrestling industry here in this comic book. And one of the cool things is some of the stories, this has been done rather recently. I read this last night. Some of the stories are fairly recent ones that he has dropped on his podcast. Several months ago, he released the fact that he was the one who came up with the idea for the Montreal Screwjob. And so he talks about that, but he talks about how it didn't quite work out the way he hoped, and how it actually caused a lot more problems than solving the issue that he thought was at hand. So you do need to kind of keep that in mind, though, that it is coming from him. So some of the stuff may not exactly be 100% accurate, but it's pretty close. So if you're a fan of professional wrestling, and of course if you're familiar with a guy like Jim Cornette, this is going to be something that you're probably going to want to pick up. Next up is Springtime in Chernobyl. This one, I actually read this again last night. This is a pretty good story about a guy who lived in Chernobyl, and then, of course, there was the nuclear reactor accident. Everybody had to leave. He talked about how they kind of found out about what was going on and the news about what was happening and how big of a problem it really is. And then years later, he actually went back to Pripyat, the town where Chernobyl was, and took a look at everything and looked at what was left and how life was starting to grow again and some of the stuff that was going on there. And then also, he talks about some of the people who he knew then and what had happened to their lives. So it's a lot more than just telling, again, the story of Chernobyl. If you've ever seen any documentaries, you have a pretty good idea of what's going on, but he actually tells some of the other stuff that was going on that you otherwise might not hear about. Let's see. We've got this Batman and Robin 232 Facsimile Edition. I love these facsimile editions. These are complete reprints of the original classic comics. And these have all of the original ads. It has all of the, sell grit newspapers, sell seeds, sell Christmas cards, like all those ads, Army Men for $1, all that stuff you used to find in comics, all the letter pages, everything like that, that's going to be in the original comic is reprinted here in these facsimile editions. Marvel's been doing a lot of these. DC is now starting to do some of these. These are, and one of the big things about these, though, is that they will remind you of how good comics were, and how much better a lot of them really were in comparison to what we find on the stands today. So, classic comics, great stuff. And Marvel is doing some more reprints a little bit differently, but we'll talk about those in a little bit when we get over to Marvel. Next up is the Batman, number 77, City of Bane. This is continuing the last arc. I believe this is the last arc of Tom King's run. I haven't been the biggest fan of stuff going on with Tom King's Batman book in the last, 2 years or whatever. Started out great. It started to kind of fall off. I thought last month's issue was actually pretty terrible, all things considered. But this, you got to admit, it's a big book. It's for whatever reason, it is one of the big things that we have to keep track of. If you're reading this and you're enjoying it, great. But if you've seen me on the Comic Book Chronicles podcast, I do have some problems with this, and I talk about it a lot there. And I'm more than welcome to talk to anybody in the future who might have a question or two about why I'm dissatisfied by it. But again, you have to admit it is one of the big releases this week. All right. Let's see. Next up, Superman Year 1, number 2. This is another big release. This is part of DC's Black Label. And it's continuing. This is a very unusual story that they've put together. And it feels, honestly, more like a continuation of the Superman story. I'm trying to remember what it was called, but it was the one by Max Brooks, I believe, where it showed Superman as a teenager, Clark as a teenager. And this kind of feels like it's more in line with that story than with any sort of modern continuity with the character. Again, I have some issues with it, but you know, it's a big release, it's a big book coming out this week, and it's one that certainly a lot of people are looking forward to it. There are 2 covers, but of course this is the Frank Miller one we're showing you here. But if you're not a fan of that cover, there is another one available. Let's see, what's up next? We've got the Absolute Carnage versus Deadpool, number 1 of 3. Continuing the Absolute Carnage storyline, taking over all of Marvel Comics. We've got Deadpool getting involved. Luckily, this is still just a $3.99. This is not a $4.99 or $5.99 book that they're throwing out there. But this is, let's face it, it's Carnage. It's Deadpool. It's for mature readers. Parental advisory. I'm sure you'll understand why. Matthew Rosenberg writing this. Rosenberg was the guy who most recently had been doing a lot of the X-Men books before Hickman came in and kind of revitalized the line, made people care about it, just to get kind of shunted aside when Hickman decided he wanted to do his mumbo jumbo on it. So at least Rosenberg, you know, he's got some high profile stuff, and Absolute Carnage versus Deadpool looks to be one of those. We've got the Deadpool Annual, and you can just see by this cover here, it is continuing the great tradition of Deadpool books. He's riding on a unicorn wielding a sword, flying over a rainbow towards who is that? Anyway, Nightmare. That's the Marvel version of Nightmare. A $4.99 annual. You're going to pay a little bit of extra, but you get some extra pages to it, so that's to be expected. Ghost Spider number 1. They are relaunching the Gwen Stacy book. So Gwen Stacy apparently is jumping the multiverse ship, leaving behind Earth 65 and now coming to Earth 616, or as we know it, the regular Marvel Universe. And this is going to be her trying to fit in with the rest of the regular Marvel Universe where she comes from. So those of you who are familiar with the Spider-Verse, you read those Spider-Verse books or Web Warriors or any of those, then yes, this is that character now shifting to the regular Marvel Universe, probably to make her a little more well known to the casual reader, so they can use her in more movies and stuff. And of course, she was in the Miles Morales Spider-Verse movie, the animated feature that came out, and so getting a little more attention to the character there. Let's see. Next up, we've got Marvel Tales X-Men number 1. Now, Marvel Tales, this is their non-facsimile reprint line, and what these are books $7.99 that have several issues of old Marvel comics reprinted. They just reprint the classic stories, so unlike the facsimile editions that are giving you all the ads and all of the letter columns and all of that kind of stuff, these are just the stories. But again, these are really good stories. Any of these Marvel Tales books that you see, they've done Iron Man, they've done Captain America, they've done Avengers, they've done all sorts of different characters. And now getting into the X-Men, you've got X-Men 58, you've got Fallen Angels number 2, you've got Uncanny X-Men number 272, Chris Claremont, Jim Lee book in there. So it's covering a huge span of stuff from the history of the Marvel Universe. But again, it reminds you a lot of times how good the classic comics were compared to the comics that we get today. Powers of 10, number 3, right? This is Powers of 10, not Powers of X. Again, Jonathan Hickman mumbo jumbo doing his thing, relaunching, revitalizing, whatever you want to say, of the X-Men universe. Very odd titles. Very weird books, the way he's put them together. But still, big release for this week. $4.99 though. You get extra pages, but of course those extra pages tend to be just Hickman drawing logos, giving you text background and the history of locations, things like that. Hey, if you're into it, you're into it. That's great. I hope you enjoy the book. But again, yeah, not for me. Valkyrie. Now this one, I'm bringing this one up, Jane Foster Valkyrie, for a very important reason. And that's because issue 1 of this comic, the orders were not the greatest. Stores just really didn't latch onto this title. And so Marvel doubled the amount of books you got for free. So for instance, if your store ordered 5 copies, just to have, some on the shelf, it's new Marvel #1, so they grabbed 5 copies, then Marvel gave them 5 more copies absolutely free. So you got an extra 100% of whatever you ordered to throw on the shelf. And one, that allows them to pad the numbers. Suddenly the sales of the first issue look like they're a lot higher because they shipped out extra books. And yes, they do get counted as sales because they're just considered comics sold to the retailers at a much lower discount. Of course, the discount's 100%, but regardless, it allows them to pad those numbers. But then it gets more copies out there. They hope more people will see it. It's less likely to get sold out, so there's more on the shelf. So what's interesting here is whether or not issue 2 is going to have a high number. So when we look at the sales a couple months down the line, if the sales of #1 are pretty good, and then #2 just disappears way down, #1's maybe number 20, out of the top 100. And then you get to issue 2, and issue 2 is 99. Then you know that their gamble did not pay off, and nobody cares. So that is going to be a key thing to watch for with this title. So I bring it up more because I'm interested to see on how good or terrible it does more than anything else. Amazing World of Gumball, original graphic novel, The Storm. For those of you who are fans of the TV show, the cartoon, you know that it is consistently probably the best animated series. The new Voltron jumped the shark after like 3 seasons. She-Ra was dead on arrival. I'm sorry. But Animated World of Gumball is the greatest one that is still being produced. And these comics do a really good job of bringing the show to the page. If you've got kids that love the show, they're going to love them. If you're an adult like me and you love them, then you're going to love it too. So keep that one in mind when you happen to be looking around in the store. All right, next up. We've got the Cristiano Ronaldo Striker Force 7. All right. For those of you who went to your local comic book store for free comic book day, they were giving away an introductory issue of this story. And it was really nothing more than a Ronaldo ego stroke. It really was just... They put this special team together of superheroes, and there's one spot left, and they need a guy who can kick this robotic ball, because this robotic ball can't maneuver well on its own. So they need some guy who kicks well to send it out there. And so, of course, they get Ronaldo, because he considers himself to be the greatest soccer player of all time, which, I mean, let's face it, he's probably the second greatest currently playing. Those of you who watch the sport, you know who's #1. You know. This is really a premium, better quality cover, extra pages edition of the same thing you got for free comic book day. There's like 5 different covers or 7 different covers. It's something ridiculous like that. There's a limited edition one that's going to be coming out, $10 for this thing. And it's one of those things where, yeah, I'm going to buy it anyway for the collection. But nonetheless, this is going to be one of those things. This is a book with international appeal. So this will be one of those things that's going to be in several languages around the world. Spain, of course, Italy, Argentina, Brazil. Those are going to be some of the big places. France, I'm sure. They're all going to get copies in their language and sent out there. And then finally, what I want to talk about is Sham #4. Now, Sham Comics, I love Sham. And Sham takes a little bit of explaining to do here. This book comes in the size of a Golden Age comic. So it's a little bit taller, a little bit wider, the way comics originally were, because they were folded newsprint. So they took the newspaper page, folded it, and that's how you originally got comics. And they're packaged in that size. They're taking scans of original Golden Age comics that have fallen into the public domain, so therefore there's no copyright left on them. And they're taking them and they're redoing all the words. And they clean them up a little bit. They still look like old paper. They still look like old classic comics. But they've redone the dialogue. They've reworked the characters. And they basically turn it into a parody. It's comedy. They even take some of the old ads and they rework the ads. It's a lot of fun. It's really one of these things where, this is number 4. Of course, you don't need to have 1, 2, and 3 because it really is anthology, much like comics were back in the day. But it's a lot of fun. It's good stuff. You do need to be a little bit older. I wouldn't buy this for a kid necessarily, but it is really fun to see a lot of that classic artwork and the way that classic storytelling was done in those Golden Age comics. But then, of course, you get the modern twist with a lot of gross-out humor and double entendres, things like that thrown in there. So it's pretty good. So anyway, guys, that's some of the stuff coming out this week. Is there anything I didn't talk about that you're really looking forward to this week? Drop it down in the comments. I'll take a look at those, what you guys have to say, and that'll help to guide some of the ones that we'll look at maybe in future episodes. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.